Yo le contesté fue que una persona que amaba no lastimaba. Y justo tampoco una persona que ama asesina.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing super well. Thank you all so much for being here and for taking the time to listen to today's video. Today's case is just so incredibly infuriating. We're going to be talking about what happened to 22-year-old Lesvy Osorio and how her murder was first ruled as a suicide, even though there was literally no way that she could have taken her own life. Investigators just wanted to quickly shut down her case and just kind of like move on from this, but her mother knew that something more was going on and that there was no way that her daughter would have done this. She fought for justice and thankfully she was listened to. However, it took a long time for her cries to be heard, and it's just really upsetting how it took her, holding marches and protesting and going on the news and doing speeches and getting the word out there for Lesvy's case to be taken seriously. I was so frustrated researching this case, and I'm sure you guys are going to feel the same way. Anytime I discuss a case that involves the police mishandling it or the government being insensitive or people just not showing empathy and showing kindness to a family who is grieving such a terrible loss, it just makes me so angry, and I just wish that there was a way to stop this from happening. Thankfully, there are so many organizations out there that are working to change laws, to change the criminal justice system. So I'm going to have some amazing organizations linked down below if you guys want to read more about it. We also are going to be discussing domestic violence in this video, which can be an incredibly triggering topic. So if you cannot hear that and you're not ready to, hear something involving domestic violence, I recommend you step away from this video and come back when you're ready to listen to it, because yes, it's very intense and it's, very sad, but it's also very important to talk about what happened to Lesvy and to continue to spread her story. I'm also going to have some domestic violence resources linked down below where you can read about the signs of abuse and who you can reach out to if you need help. There's just a lot of information to go over, so this video is probably going to be very long. I really appreciate you guys being here and taking the time to listen to Lesvy's case. As I mentioned in every single video, you guys are the best familia ever. I love you guys so much. I appreciate you guys more than you even know, and I'm just really grateful for the little familia that we have formed. If you guys are new to this channel and this is your first time being here, welcome, bienvenidos. Hopefully you guys can hit the subscribe button and join our little familia. But anyways, with that, let's jump right in and let's talk about what happened to Lesvy. Lesvy Berlin Osorio was born on January 7th, 1995 in Ciudad de Mexico to her parents Araceli and to her father Lesvy. She was an only child, so she spent a lot of time with her parents and she just absolutely loved her family. Her favorite book was actually The Little Prince, and just like any child, she loved eating ice cream, she loved eating sweets, and she dreamed of traveling the world when she grew up. She specifically really wanted to go visit Spain one day. Her desire to see and explore the world catapulted her into learning different languages as she got older. She wanted to diversify herself, so she began studying 4 different languages. She was studying English, Italian, French, and Catalan, which is crazy. Like, I cannot imagine trying to learn all those different languages and be fluent in all of that, but she was determined to travel, and she told her mom that if she wanted to travel the world, she would have to learn how to navigate it on her own, and that's why she wanted to become fluent in all of these languages. She really wanted to learn Japanese as well and become fluent enough that she would be able to travel to Japan, live there, and become a translator at the Olympic Games. So she was just an incredibly well-rounded girl. She was always eager to experience different things, and she just always wanted to continue learning something new. Besides trying to learn all of these languages, she was also learning how to play the violin before her death, and she already knew how to play a couple of instruments. She actually joined a female group at the UNAM, which is the National Autonomous University of Mexico, that consisted of other female students from different high schools, where she would participate with them in musical numbers at different institutions like museums, cultural centers, and different schools. So she grew very close with the members of this program, and they actually became her best friends. Her parents were just so proud of her for being a part of this program and just proud of everything that she had accomplished. She was so young and she was just incredibly smart, and again, she was just an incredibly well-rounded person. Now, unfortunately, she did run into some issues when trying to re-enroll in high school due to her father being a Honduran refugee. So because he was a refugee, they were having some some issues registering the family's last name. So because of that, Lesvy couldn't legally continue studying until this issue was resolved. Her father said, quote, "I am a political refugee in Mexico due to my immigration status. My daughter was initially not given my last name until I regularized my situation. For that reason, she had problems continuing high school," end quote. So for now, high school was kind of on pause until the situation got resolved. And around this time, Lesvy's parents actually ended up separating. And Lesvy just wanted to become more independent at this time. And she actually wanted to move in with her boyfriend. So at 17 years old, and while the bureaucratic obstacle was being resolved, Lesvy decided to take a break from high school. She got a job, saved up some money, and moved out after she turned 18. She worked at a few different restaurants as a server, and she would also walk dogs to get some extra cash. So she took this break from high school while the whole enrollment situation was sorted out, and she used that time to work, study languages on her own time, and also continue with the UNAM's female group. So it's not like she just quit high school and became lazy or anything like that. She kind of just took a pause while everything got resolved. She continued learning her languages, she continued playing, her instruments, and she basically continued on with her life besides going to school. When all of this happened, when the case hit the news, a lot of people were trying to make it seem like Lesvy was a lazy girl that just stopped attending school because she wanted to move in with her boyfriend and just wanted to, take a break and just wanted to kind of do her own thing. But in reality, her family says that just wasn't the case, that Lesvy was actually very eager to finish high school, that she was going to actually take an exit exam as soon as she was able to enroll in high school again. And then after high school, that she wanted to officially enroll as a student at the university. Her parents say that she wanted to enroll in the French language program and that she eventually wanted to study abroad with the help of a scholarship. Now, this is something that's actually going to come up a lot in the case. Lesvy's parents have had to defend her so much throughout the investigation, which is incredibly frustrating because instead of trying to deal with their daughter's death and deal with the investigation and try to get justice, they had to spend so much time defending their daughter and making sure people saw her as a human being and didn't just see her as this high school dropout. Now, going back to her relationship, she eventually ended up breaking up with her boyfriend, and when she turned 22 years old, she began a new romantic relationship with 29-year-old Jorge Luis Gonzalez Hernandez, who she met through a mutual friend. Now, Jorge worked at the UNAM, which again is the university, and he worked there as part of the custodial staff since 2007, but he was actually waiting on word if his contract would be renewed, and it was in the process of kind of being worked out. So at the time he began dating Lesvy, he was technically jobless because, again, he was waiting for his contract to be renewed. Now, Jorge had ties to the university because his father, Arturo, worked as the driver for the school's general director of personnel named Marco. So because his dad, he was able to get his son, Jorge, a job in the custodial department. This connection also helped Jorge keep his job because he actually wasn't the best worker. He was actually terminated in 2013 for missing more than 7 days of work in a row. So he wasn't a really good worker, but they ended up hiring him again because of his dad. And along with him just not being a good worker, he also had a criminal record. He committed 4 crimes between 2008 and 2015, which consisted of commercial robbery, robbery without violence, burglary of residence, and crimes committed against public servants. He had also been in a rehabilitation center on more than 5 different occasions for drug abuse. So this guy just really wasn't the best person. He was lazy at work, he had a criminal history, he had committed robbery, and he also had a drug problem. So, it's very different compared to the type of person that Lesvy was, who was someone that was very intelligent and studied all these languages and wanted to travel and had ambition and had dreams for her life. We don't really know what they connected on, what was their common area of interest or why Lesvy liked him or how this relationship happened, but they began dating and they actually moved in together 4 months after meeting. They moved in together into a student house, so things were moving pretty quickly in this relationship. Everything seemed to be going great until Jorge began showing Lesvy his true colors. Now, Jorge is described as being a very insecure person who was always accusing Lesvy of wanting to leave him, of cheating on him, of talking to other other men behind his back, and everyone just says that he was a very toxic person. He actually made Lesvy give him her social media passwords, and according to her friend, when they would go out, just the girls, Jorge would spy on them. Like, he would follow them just to make sure that Lesvy wasn't actually talking to a guy at the club or at a restaurant. I mean, he was just very, very controlling. One of Lesvy's lifelong friends named Esteban, who grew up in the same neighborhood as Jorge and was actually the one to introduce them to each other, witnessed a very intense scene between them in February of 2017. Now, Esteban lived in the same student house as Lesvy and Jorge, and he overheard Jorge yelling at Lesvy through their door. And when he opened the door, he saw Lesvy against a wall, crying, yelling, "Don't do it." And he saw Jorge holding a piece of glass up to his wrist, saying that he was going to kill himself if she left him. Esteban stepped in to calm down the situation because this was just so insane. I mean, literally, this is a crazy scene to walk into. So he tried to calm things down, but Jorge ended up getting upset that he was involving himself in his relationship, and this then resulted in them getting into a physical fight. Due to the chaos, Esteban, Lesvy, and Jorge were kicked out of the student house and were no longer allowed to live there. So yeah, this fight was very intense, and this actually wasn't the only house that they were kicked out of. Another friend that also shared a student housing rental with them, named Natalia, also witnessed Jorge's violent behavior. She said that once during the middle of the night, her bedroom door flung open because Lesvy was pushed into it by Jorge, and she fell to the ground. She said that she often overheard Lesvy crying and Jorge just screaming insults or these terrible accusations at her. So because of the constant fighting, they were also kicked out of this student housing for violence and for being just so aggressive and loud. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the reason they were able to live in student housing is because Jorge worked at the campus as, a janitor, and because Lesvy was a part of that women's group that was on campus that did the music stuff. So she was able to live on campus because of her connection to that, and because, again, she was just waiting for her dad's name and all that stuff to be cleared so she could register in the university. So that's how they were able to live in student housing. Anyways, going back to Jorge and Lesvy, a week before Lesvy's death, she and Jorge rented a room from a woman named Maria Elena. Lesvy was the only one with a key to the house, so she would actually have to schedule her days according to Jorge's daily activities and be at home waiting to let him inside. This meant that she basically would waste her day because she wasn't able to leave because she had to be at home and be ready in case he came home because he didn't have a key. Now, I'm not really sure why they had this arrangement, why they couldn't make an extra key for Jorge, or if maybe Jorge did that on purpose. That way he could kind of continue to control Lesvy and make sure that she was home all the time and kind of not be able to have her own schedule. During this time, when they moved into Maria's house, her friend started to notice bruises on her body. One time her friend asked her about it and she said that it was nothing, that she ran into something and that was it. However, another time Lesvy actually confided in her friends and showed them a photo of an abrasion on her face. Her friends were just shocked by this and they were obviously very concerned for their friend's safety, but unfortunately there really wasn't much that they could do because Lesvy began separating herself from her friends and from her family. She just knew that her relationship was not going well, but Jorge had gained total control over her. According to expert opinions during the trial, Lesvy had what is called learned helplessness syndrome, which made her justify the emotional, financial, and physical violence she experienced from Jorge. These experts said that basically Lesvy experiencing these traumatic things made her believe that she was utterly powerless and that things couldn't change even if she tried. It's all just very tragic and it just breaks my heart that Lesvy was going through this and that she just felt stuck in this toxic relationship. I know it's so incredibly difficult to hear what was happening to Lesvy, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I will have some resources linked down below for help if you or someone you know is in a violent or a toxic relationship. Now, let's fast forward to May 2nd, 2017, which unfortunately is the day that this terrible tragedy took place. That day at around 11:10 in the morning, Jorge, Lesvy, and Lesvy's dog left their home to start their day. Jorge was going to go have breakfast with his mom, and Lesvy was going to campus to do some stuff, so they both kind of just went their separate ways. At around 1:30 p.m., Lesvy met up with Jorge and with his mom Maria as they were finishing up their breakfast. They kind of talked for a bit before saying goodbye and heading out. Jorge's dad, Arturo, was nearby, so they decided to go see him quickly, talk for a bit, and just kind of catch up. At around 3:30 p.m., they ended their conversation with Arturo, said goodbye, and then Jorge and Lesvy went to the school's campus to hang out. They were going to meet with Jorge's friend, who was also part of the school's custodial team named Carlos David, but they couldn't find him, so they decided to just go eat food at a stand nearby, and Jorge actually knew the guy working there named Beto, so they talked for a bit while Lesvy just ate some chilaquiles. Sometime after, Beto called Carlos over the radio to meet them, and then at around 6 p.m., Carlos arrived there with them, and they all just kind of sat around deciding what to do next. They were debating whether they should hang out somewhere else or if they should just stay on campus and just get some beers and just kind of hang out there. Again, just to summarize, it's Lesvy, her dog, her boyfriend Jorge, and then Jorge's two friends, Carlos David and Beto, all hanging out together. In the end, they decided that they should just go get some beers and just drink them on campus, so they walked to a nearby store to get the beer, and then they went back to campus to drink them, and when they ran out of beer, they ended up getting 2 bottles of mezcal to continue drinking. At around midnight, Carlos bought some ecstasy pills, and according to Jorge, he, Carlos, and Lesvy each took 3 pills. Shortly after, at around 3 a.m., Lesvy and Jorge began to leave as well, and they said goodbye to Carlos. Carlos said that they both looked normal, that they hadn't fought that night, that there was no tension, there was no drama. I mean, to him, it seemed like Jorge and Lesvy were happy and were fine that night. Carlos said that he purposely tried to avoid a fight happening by literally not speaking to Lesvy directly. Because again, Jorge was a very jealous person and he didn't like men speaking to his girlfriend, and everyone knew this. So if they were hanging out in a group setting with other boys, the other boys would literally try to avoid Lesvy because they didn't want a fight to happen. So that night when they were hanging out, Carlos says that he did his best to avoid a fight because the last time that he was hanging out with them, Jorge got into an argument with Lesvy and actually hit her face 3 times. And Carlos decided to step in and kind of defend Lesvy and get Jorge to stop hitting her. Of course, Jorge didn't like that Carlos was getting involved, so a fight ended up happening. So yeah, Carlos said that it was just a very intense relationship, and to me, it's just very crazy how so many people knew of the abuse and actually saw it happen with their own eyes, but nothing was really done about it. So anyways, Carlos said that when Jorge and Lesvy left, they looked normal, Lesvy was walking fine, and that was it. From there, according to Jorge, he and Lesvy each drank around 20 or 30 cans of beer by themselves. Again, this is according to Jorge's interview transcript. I don't know how someone could drink 30 cans of beer. I didn't even know that was really possible. I feel like you would definitely pass out or maybe even get alcohol poisoning from that. I don't know, but just to think of Lesvy, this tiny little girl drinking 30 cans of beer, it just doesn't really sound realistic. But again, that's Jorge's words, and you honestly cannot trust Jorge's point of view. It's really unfortunate because he's the last person that was with Lesvy. We really only know what actually happened based on the security camera footage from the campus. According to the footage, at around 4 a.m., Jorge and Lesvy are seen walking, and then they suddenly stop. Their hand motions indicate that an argument began between them, and in the video surveillance, you can see Jorge grab the dog's leash, and although the image is a little bit blurry and it's kind of hard to make out, you can tell by his movements that he lifts the dog's leash up and then hits Lesvy with it. Then Jorge just starts pushing her and hitting her and just grabbing her very aggressively, and of course Lesvy is trying to defend herself, and to try to get him to stop doing this, she goes up to him and just starts to kind of hug him tightly. That way he can't really move, but he ends up getting free from her hug by aggressively elbowing her in the face, which then made Lesvy fall over into the grass, and from there, Jorge just kind of walks away from the scene. Lesvy gets up and she goes after him to try to calm him down. Then at 4:18 in the morning, they are seen on camera again and are now standing in front of a telephone booth, and you can see Lesvy approaching him since again he was walking slightly in front of her. However, after she approaches him, the camera pans away from them, so we don't know what happened next. Again, all we know is what Jorge says, but again, his word is just not something that we can trust. About an hour later, after they're seen standing by this telephone booth, at 5:19 in the morning, Jorge is seen walking off campus alone with his hands in his pocket, and you can also see him kind of looking over his shoulder, staring back towards where Lesvy was standing by the telephone booth. We don't see Lesvy at all, but we do see that her dog follows him since he's now without a leash, and Jorge gets annoyed at the fact that the dog is following him, so he ends up kicking Lesvy's dog, and the dog just kind of gets scared and stays behind. And then that was it. We see Jorge leaving campus, we see the dog staying behind, and we don't see Lesvy. At around 6:30 in the morning, morning, Maria, the woman who Jorge and Lesvy were renting a room from, wakes up and starts to make breakfast. And as she's making breakfast, she hears her dog won't stop barking. So she looks out the window to see what's going on, and that's when she sees Jorge just standing in the entrance of the house. Maria sees him doing that, and she thinks that it's really weird that he was just kind of standing there at 6:30 in the morning. She wasn't sure if he was on his way out or if he was barely returning home, but she just noticed that he was acting very weird. He looked really nervous and just kind of suspicious, so she asked him if something was wrong, but he didn't answer her. So she just kind of ignored the situation, went back inside, and continued making her breakfast. Shortly after this, Maria saw him again, but this time he was leaning against him and Lesvy's bedroom door. Maria tells him to knock on the door to see if Lesvy is inside so she can let him in, but he tells her that Lesvy isn't home. Again, Lesvy is the one that has the key to the room. Jorge doesn't have a key, so there's no way for him to get inside the room. So to help him out, Maria decides to grab her own key, open the door, and let Jorge inside. Maria says that 10 minutes after letting Jorge inside the room, she heard some scratching at the home's main entrance, and she went to go see what the scratching was, and that's when she sees that Lesvy's dog is scratching the door to be let inside. Now, she sees this, and again, she's just confused because she's like, what is going on? Like, why was Jorge standing here at 6:30 in the morning? Why is Lesvy not in her room? And now, why is Lesvy's dog literally scratching at the door all by himself? She was thinking to herself, did Lesvy let the dog out by himself? Did the dog run away? I mean, what is going on? So she opens a door and lets Lesvy's dog inside. After this, some time passes and Jorge finally wakes up at around 9:30 in the morning. He says that he was super hungover and that he realized that Lesvy wasn't lying in bed next to him. He started to check his phone and realized that he had no messages from her, so he decided to go out looking for her. He calls his friend Carlos David, the one that they were with earlier that morning at around 10 or 11 a.m., and asked him if Lesvy ended up staying with him after he went home. Carlos was like, no, like she's not staying with me. I literally said bye to you guys first and you guys went your own way. So Jorge tells him that he has no idea what's going on, that he doesn't remember much of what happened, and that Lesvy isn't home, so he doesn't know what to do. Carlos tells him that he doesn't really know how to help him because he doesn't know where Lesvy is, and with that, Jorge hangs up the phone and just kind of continues on with his morning. Later that day, at around 3:16 p.m., Jorge heads over to campus and meets with Carlos in person, and that's when Carlos tells him that the body of a young woman was found dead right there on campus, that her body was found by a worker at around 5:50 in the morning, and that she was found in front of a telephone booth on her knees with a telephone cord wrapped around her neck. Police had still not identified the body because the victim had no ID on her, but Carlos said that it appeared that she had the same characteristics as Lesvy, that the young woman had curly hair, ripped jeans, and was found holding a dog's leash. He also added that the girl had a bruise on her face as well. When Jorge hears that a body has been found on campus that resembles Lesvy, he acted surprised and said, well, there's no way that's Lesvy. Like, why would that be her? Like, who would have done this to her? And then he kind of just brushes off the news and moves on with his day. He goes on to have drinks and then he goes back home. He doesn't even go to question the police and ask to see if this is actually his girlfriend. He doesn't try to contact Lesvy. He doesn't try to contact her family. Nothing. He goes back home, goes about his day, and just never hears from Lesvy. He says that he didn't really start to worry about this body being Lesvy until nighttime came around and he just never heard back from her. Now, at this point, the whole city was now aware about the discovery of the young girl's body on campus, and everyone was just shocked by this. I mean, how did a body end up on campus? Who did this? Why? And who was this victim? At around 8:30 p.m., Jorge decides to call one of Lesvy's friends named Laura through Lesvy's Facebook account. So Laura picked up the call because she thought Lesvy was the one calling her, but when she picked up the phone, she realized that it was Jorge. Laura says that Jorge was crying and that he told her, quote, everything went to shit, and that he needed to see her in person. After the call with Laura, Jorge went to go meet with her in person and told her that he had a bad feeling that Lesvy was dead because they had found a young woman on campus that matched her characteristics and because he couldn't find her and hadn't heard from her all day. He was freaking out and he said, quote, "Lesvy is dead." Now, Laura hears this and she is just shocked because her and Lesvy were very close friends. So to hear that maybe the body found on campus was her best friend just broke her heart. And she told Jorge that they needed to go look for her immediately and confirm if this was her. So the two of them head over to the security office on campus and they ask the security guard if they have seen Lesvy or if they knew anything about her whereabouts, but the security told them that he knew nothing. So they start leaving the security office, and as they're leaving, they actually run into a lawyer who was there investigating the crime scene, and the lawyer overheard the conversation with the security guard. So he's like, "Hey, who are you guys? How do you know Lesvy? What's her full name? Like, who is this girl?" Then another lawyer comes out to speak to them, and they take Jorge to a toxicology exam at the prosecutor's office, and they show him a photo of Lesvy and ask him to identify her. According to investigator Francisco Guzman, Jorge got very nervous after he identified her, and when he heard the other investigators tell his colleagues that they had the first person confirming this woman's identity. After confirming the body to be Lesvy, Jorge gets dropped off at his home, and then shortly after, Jorge calls Laura and says, "Can I go stay with you? Because my landlord, Maria, kicked me out." Now, the reason Maria kicked him out of the home is because she had heard the news about how a young woman had been found on campus and how the young woman had characteristics similar to Lesvy. So Maria just kind of started putting, the dots together. She was like, okay, Lesvy is missing. Jorge came home at 6:30 in the morning and was acting very weird. He looked nervous. Lesvy's dog came home by itself. Like, she started to realize that Jorge was probably involved in this, and she just didn't want to have any involvement in the case. She was scared of Jorge, and she didn't know what he was capable of, so she decided to just kick him out. So Jorge is asking Laura, "Can I go stay with you?" But Laura also says no because she didn't have a good feeling about this whole situation. She knew that Jorge was like a bad influence on Lesvy, that he treated her badly, so she really didn't want anything to do with him, and she obviously didn't want to help him by housing him. I don't know where Jorge ended up going after this. I don't know if he ended up going to stay with his family or with his friends or where he slept that night. However, the following day, Laura calls Lesvy's mom and tells her about what happened and of her suspicions of Jorge. At this point, the public still did not know the identity of the young woman, so Lesvy's mom, Araceli, had no idea that any of this had happened. Lesvy didn't live with her, so it's not like she kept track of her daughter 24/7. So Araceli literally had no idea that her daughter was missing, that a body had been found on campus that could possibly be her daughter, that Jorge was abusive. Like, she knew nothing. According to an interview with Araceli, when Laura told her about what was going on, she was so confused because she was literally just messaging her daughter on Facebook Messenger. So she tells Laura, like, "What do you mean Lesvy hasn't been seen by anyone or no one has been able to get in touch with her? I'm literally talking to her on Facebook right now." Well, it turns out that Araceli wasn't talking to her daughter on Facebook. It was actually Jorge who was the one messaging Araceli through her daughter's Facebook account. As soon as Araceli realized that she wasn't actually speaking to her daughter, she messaged Jorge asking why he had access to her daughter's Facebook account, and he told her that she just left her account open on the computer, which Araceli just knew wasn't the case. Lesvy just wouldn't do that. She wouldn't just leave her Facebook open for anyone to access it. So she then asked Jorge, "What's going on? Where is my daughter?" And Jorge tells her that he and Lesvy were drinking at the campus and that he was so out of it that he doesn't remember what happened at all. After this, Araceli and Laura go to identify the body found on campus. Araceli just knew that this was her daughter right away when she saw the tennis shoes that she was wearing. She had actually just bought her those red shoes for her birthday not too long ago. The following day, after confirming this, Lesvy's funeral was held, and it was a very intimate funeral. Only her closest friends and family attended, and Jorge actually attended as well. Araceli said that she didn't really know much about Jorge. He and Lesvy had only been dating for a couple of months, so she really knew nothing about this man or about their relationship. A friend of Lesvy named Guadalupe said that Jorge was just acting very suspicious at the funeral. He was just kind of like tugging on his clothes, which were really dirty. His hair was a hot mess. He was tapping his foot on the ground, and he just appeared very uncomfortable. They said that he didn't look uncomfortable because he was sad at the fact that his girlfriend had been found dead. dead, that it looked more like he was paranoid and just really nervous to be there. During the funeral, Jorge asked Guadalupe if they could kind of go to a corner to speak by themselves, and she said that she had a very weird feeling about this, so she began to actually secretly record their conversation. In the conversation, Jorge said that he's been asking himself if he actually did hurt Lesvy, and told Guadalupe that he wasn't sure at all if he killed her or not, because he was very drugged that night and he doesn't really remember much. He does remember that they did get into a fight that night because he was jealous of a guy that Lesvy was talking to, but that was it. He also said that the reason he decided to go to the funeral was because, quote, he who has nothing to hide has no fear, which is a very weird thing to say. I mean, the entire conversation was very, very odd. He was basically telling Guadalupe that he could have killed Lesvy, but that he just doesn't remember if he did. Araceli also noticed his very odd behavior at the funeral. She said that Jorge wasn't crying, that instead he was asking her a lot of questions about how the investigation was going, about what evidence they had, about what they had discovered, and things like that, which was just very strange to her. Like, yes, it's normal to wonder how an investigation is going, but she said that the way he was speaking about it and all the questions that he had, it just seemed like he was being very nosy and just wanted to know every single detail about what the police knew. While she was speaking to him, she also noticed that he had a lot of scratch marks on his arm. From that moment on, Araceli just knew that he had something to do with the death of her daughter. Now, since this was all over the media, the official Twitter account for Mexico City's Attorney General's office decided to give an update the following day via a series of tweets. Unfortunately, these tweets just added more to the public outrage because they were completely inappropriate. They said that Lesvy's death had been officially ruled as a suicide, that at the time of Lesvy's death, she was on drugs, she had consumed alcohol, and that Lesvy was a high school dropout who still had classes to make up, that she was currently not enrolled as a student at UNAM, and that she lived with a boyfriend. In other words, basically that Lesvy was drinking and taking drugs that night, that she was a bad student, that she lived with a boy. So that's basically the only logical reason as to why she would end up like that. According to Helga Jaregui, a data analyst and editor at the organization Impunidad Cero, which studies impunity in cases of femicide to combat it, authorities should not have exposed this private information because what Lesvy did the day she died, her academic achievements, or her living situation should not justify her death. Like, why does it matter if she was a high school dropout? Why does it matter if she was like doing this? Why does it matter if she was living with her boyfriend? That doesn't change the fact that she's dead and that someone did this to her. It was as if the authorities were trying to explain that she committed suicide because she realized she was not a good girl or like a good person or successful in life, so that's why she decided to end things. Everyone just felt like these tweets were taking away the focus from finding her killer, and instead were just trying to focus on her lifestyle and just kind of push a bad narrative about her. Now, mentioning the fact that Lesvy was not a student at the UNAM was done in an attempt to distance the university from her death. That way they could not be held responsible for the lack of safety or security at the campus. It was just a very unnecessary detail to add because now people were being very nasty and just speaking very poorly of Lesvy. They were no longer feeling empathy or feeling compassion or just really caring about her death because now she was labeled as just like a bad party girl who made bad choices. Araceli had to come out and defend her daughter because they were calling her an alcoholic, a dumb girl, a dropout. They even accused Lesvy of stealing her dog from someone else. Like, it was just getting out of control. Everything was just so crazy. Araceli had to come out and she said, quote, "We are not going to allow my daughter to be stigmatized in that way. My daughter was not an alcoholic, only a waitress. She was not a dog sitter. The dog she took was her pet. It was her adoration. She adopted him. His name was Uncle Michael." It's just really sad how Lesvy's parents had to come out and defend her daughter when they were still trying to deal with her death and understand it and trying to figure out what actually happened. Those tweets were just very inappropriate, and the fact that they hadn't even told Lesvy's family first, it's not like they were like, hey, we're going to tweet this out to calm everybody down, or we're going to tell people this information. They just like put it out there to, I don't know why. Like, I don't know why they decided to tweet that. It's just actually insane. I feel like they could have just updated the public by saying, we're aware of this case, we're investigating it, we're doing our best to figure out what actually happened, we'll update you guys when we know more. Like, I feel like that would have been an appropriate thing to say, but they didn't have to go and say, say she's a high school dropout, she lives with a boyfriend, she does drugs, she drinks, and that's why she took her own life. Now, despite Lesvy's body being found with clear signs of violence and her last being seen with her abusive boyfriend, authorities were just very quick to jump to the conclusion that her death was a suicide, and they just didn't want to look further into it. Thousands of women began tweeting the hashtag #IfTheyKillMe, which was short for "If they kill me, what will they say to blame me for my own death?" Some tweets with the hashtags were, quote, "I hope the police and the media focus on my killer, not my clothes, studies, words, or who I go to bed with." And other tweets were saying, "Pay attention to #IfTheyKillMe, because if you are a woman and you are killed, before they investigate your full name, they will find information to invalidate you as a human being." Feminist groups were just so upset about this. They were like, oh my gosh, they don't even care who Lesvy is as a person or about what actually happened to her. They're just immediately ruling it as a suicide because of her being a high school dropout and all of these things. And they were getting upset. They were like, listen, if this happens to me, I don't want them to just focus on my educational history or anything like that. I want them to focus on my death and on my killer and on getting justice. On March 5th, a protest was held by Araceli and various feminist organizations to demand that Lesvy's case be looked at as a femicide. During this march, Araceli spoke to everyone and said, quote, "By her own decision, my daughter chose to leave high school for a moment to dedicate herself to work. She separated from us to live with her partner. That does not stigmatize her or turn her into a despicable being as they seem to make her seem. She was studying languages. She was not an alcoholic girl. She was not a drug addict girl like they make her out to be. And precisely, if we had not expressed our disagreement, it is because we were in a process and trying to understand what was happening. Anyone who has suffered this knows perfectly well what we are talking about. And what I do want to emphasize is that it is not possible for this type of abuse to continue being committed by the authorities, where women are always to blame for what happens to us." End quote. On May 8th, Elena Cárdenas Rodriguez, the Director of Social Communication of the Attorney General's office, actually resigned due to the tweets, and all the backlash that they got and things like that. So she resigned, which made people a little bit annoyed. Like they felt like that wasn't enough of like a punishment or felt like it was enough of a consequence for what they did. But she did end up resigning, and they also did apologize for making those tweets. Now, Araceli was also facing some roadblocks from investigators. They were not showing her Lesvy's case file. They didn't show her the autopsy or the surveillance footage from the night she died. They were also going to Jorge a lot, who again had a history of abusing her, for information rather than to the family. It was just so frustrating, and it took multiple marches and lots of public outrage for investigators to finally share Lesvy's case file with her own family and with their lawyers 2 months later. Araceli said, "We have been kept in the dark from the beginning. We don't know the state in which she was found, who was there to investigate, and whether they followed proper protocols to investigate femicide." When the family finally got their hands on the case file, they began to review the autopsy, all of the evidence, and they just knew that they had to double check all of this. Like they couldn't really just trust what was given to them. They knew that they were going to have to do their own autopsy, that they were going to have to review their own evidence and just make sure that what was in this case file was the truth. Now, moving over to Jorge, he was actually questioned by authorities, and he actually changed his story more than 8 times by first saying that he wasn't with Lesvy that night. Then he said that he was with Lesvy. Then he said that he was with her, but that he left early before anything happened. I mean, this guy was just giving the police so many different versions of what he actually experienced that night. The one thing that he was very adamant on was that Lesvy did take her own life and that she is the only person who placed a telephone cord around her neck. Unfortunately, for some reason, authorities decided to believe this guy. They believed his side of the story, despite the case file showing sufficient evidence to classify her death as a femicide. Investigators were like, no, there's no way anyone else did this. She definitely took her own life. However, we are going to arrest Jorge on the charge of simple homicide by omission. Now, this means that he was present at the time that Lesvy committed suicide, but didn't do anything to stop her. Now, hearing this made Lesvy's family very disappointed. They were thinking to themselves, how could authorities just ignore all of the evidence in her case file showing that she had all these bruises and all these marks on her and all of these statements from people saying that Jorge was abusive. Like, the fact that they were just ignoring all of that and just taking Jorge's word for it was just insane. Araceli said that she was not going to accept this, so she actually appealed. And thanks to the support from the community and from feminist organizations, the judge granted Araceli and her lawyers 4 months to gather evidence and present them at an allegation hearing. However, they knew that 4 months was not enough. It was not enough to gather all of the information and to truly make sure that Lesvy's case gets treated like a femicide. So they appealed that 4-month time frame, and they got an extension until January 11th of 2018 for the hearings to begin. Time was ticking and they needed to get to work. A criminology teacher at the National Institute of Criminal Sciences named Victor Chavez joined in and helped the family gather this evidence to prove that Lesvy did not take her own life. To do this, he decided to make a reconstruction of Lesvy's death. He, just like the family, was 100% sure that Lesvy did not commit suicide, that this was actually a murder. So he found a girl the same height and weight as Lesvy. He grabbed a phone booth with the same height as the one Lesvy was found at, and he made the girl perform various positions with a phone cord around her neck to show how none of them could create enough tension for Lesvy to actually take her own life. He was just like, there's no way. Like, look at all the different angles, all of the different positions. Like, there's no way Lesvy could have put this on herself and then, put herself in a position to create enough tension for her neck to snap. Along with this, Victor also pointed out the irregularities in Lesvy's autopsy. It stated that Lesvy had bruises on her body from hitting herself, but again, Victor was like, that's not possible. So the family had a second autopsy conducted, and it revealed that the hits to her that caused those bruises were made with great force and that someone must have done it to her. The second autopsy also revealed that her hyoid bone was broken, which is often a clear indicator of strangulation. It also revealed that she had internal bleeding from the intense blows and that she also had genetic material underneath her fingernails, indicating that she was defending herself from an attacker. They decided to test the dried blood from underneath her fingernails, and it came back as a match to Jorge. With this, with the reconstruction of the crime scene and with the second autopsy results, Victor determined that, quote, the suspension of the body could not be achieved, therefore there could not be asphyxiation. Secondly, there is not enough pressure around the body, therefore there could not have been asphyxiation. In none of them could we recreate the position in which Lesvy was found, since they are not suicidal mechanics. So, all of this pointed to a homicide, not to a suicide. They presented all of this evidence in the hearing, and finally the case was treated as a femicide and not as a suicide. The court changed the charges against Jorge, and his official trial for murder began on September 10th, 2019. Now, getting to this trial was such a long journey. Lesvy's family was fighting for this to happen for the past 2 years. They had to undergo not being taken seriously and not being listened to. It's just so frustrating, but Lesvy's family is just so incredibly strong, and it's just admirable how hard they fought to get justice. Araceli literally said, I'm not going to stop fighting and making noise until Jorge is put behind bars forever. During the trial, 28 minutes out of 166 analyzed hours of camera surveillance from the university campus were shown, and with this, the timeline of what happened that night was created. Now, if you recall, after Lesvy and Jorge were at the phone booth, the cameras panned away from them, and then we couldn't really see what happened after that. All we saw was Jorge later walking away by himself with his hands in his pocket, and then him kicking the dog. Well, it was determined that Jorge had killed Lesvy in that moment when the camera panned away. The prosecutors explained how Jorge took advantage of Lesvy's inability to defend herself due to her being under the influence and exercised his want for dominance over her, his jealousy, and his harassment towards her in the form of violence, and murdered Lesvy. In seconds, he took the telephone cord from the phone booth, placed it around Lesvy's neck, exerted pressure, and killed her. Then he just left her body there in that position and walked away with no remorse. The prosecution just again said that it was not possible for Lesvy to have done this to herself because there wasn't even a knot on the cord. So without that knot, it was literally impossible for it to withhold Lesvy's fall so that she could have taken her own life. During the trial, there were 68 witnesses that consisted of neighbors, friends, family members, teachers, medical experts, and workers from the university that testified. While all of these people gave their testimony, Jorge was literally falling asleep in the chair. Like, yeah, this guy was literally falling asleep while he was on trial for murder. The judge had to step in and scold him and was like, hey, you cannot be sleeping. But Jorge said that he was sleeping because he hadn't eaten or had any breakfast that morning, so he was feeling very weak. Now, as for Jorge's defense, they tried arguing that Lesvy had ample reasons to want to end her life and that Jorge was never violent with anyone. His ex-girlfriend, Patricia, who he dated from 2009 to 2016 and also lived with, testified. She said that she never experienced any violence from him, that he was very respectful, that he would go to family events and just was very kind, that she never experienced any beating, violence, or physical or psychological attacks. So she was basically saying that he was an amazing partner. Jorge's parents also testified and basically said the same thing. His mom said that she never saw any problems of drug abuse or anything like that, and that she never saw her son be violent. His father, Arturo, said that he met Lesvy a couple of times and that the couple seemed happy, that he didn't see any signs of violence between them, that he didn't see any type of arguments or anything like that. He added that he was helping his son financially since he didn't have a job at the moment, and that if he believed his son was having a drug problem or if he was abusive or anything like that he wouldn't be supporting him financially. Now that part was a little bit confusing because Jorge was in rehab centers before, so I don't know if maybe the father believed that Jorge wasn't doing drugs anymore or what really happened with that. Now, a lot of people were upset at the fact that Jorge's parents and his ex were testifying and basically defending him when there were so many other witnesses who testified about how Jorge was abusive, how he was violent, and how he wasn't a good person. So people were just frustrated at the fact that his parents would defend him and try to make him seem like a good person. The trial was just very lengthy. There was so much information to go over, but finally on October 11th, 2019, Jorge's verdict was read. The judges determined that Jorge, quote, affected Lesvy's dignity, violated her right to a life free of violence, and exercised the most extreme gender violence against Lesvy. In the end, he was found guilty and sentenced to 45 years in prison on October 16th. Finally, some type of justice was made. At his sentencing, Jorge did make a statement and he said, all I want to say is that I loved Lesvy. I didn't hurt her. I didn't kill her. To which Araceli replied with, when you love someone, you don't hurt them. And she also addressed the judges in a shaky voice and thanked them profoundly by saying, this has been an example of justice for Lesvy and all the women who have been snatched from us. During his sentencing, people were outside the courtroom shouting, Lesvy has not died, we are all Lesvy. And Lesvy, listen. Justice has been made. That part made me cry. Like, I don't know, just something about them saying like, Lesvy, we got you, like we got you justice. We have your killer behind bars. It's just very powerful and it's just very impactful saying that, and just all these people getting together to fight for justice for someone that they don't even know. Everyone just kind of felt a sigh of relief knowing that justice was made, that he was going to be behind bars for a long time, and it just felt good to know that their cries were heard. Capital Prosecutor Ernestina offered Araceli and her family an apology on behalf of the government. She said, quote, we are here to admit that the justice system failed Lesvy and her family, and for this reason, we offer a sincere apology up front and with all respect for the violations of her human rights and re-victimization that occurred in her case. With this act, we want to dignify the memory of Lesvy so that she is remembered as the supportive and empathetic young woman she was. End quote. 2 years later, Lesvy's family filed an appeal and they actually managed to increase Jorge's sentence to 52 years and 6 months in prison. Jorge would also have to pay a fine of 377,450 pesos for damages and about 50,000 pesos for funeral expenses. Now, these numbers were calculated based on the money Lesvy would have made if her life wasn't taken from her. Jorge and his lawyers are planning to appeal this, but I wasn't able to find an update on that. Lesvy just had the world world at her fingertips. You know, she had the drive to do something incredible with her life, to see the world, to travel, to give back to her parents. You know, she just wanted to be loved, but all of this was taken from her in the blink of an eye by Jorge. It's very sad how everything went down, but Araceli said that she was very content with the new sentencing and said, quote, "The fight is just beginning. You will see us together in court and on the streets. They are going to know us." Araceli has become a huge advocate for gender violence and says that she will not stop fighting for everyone. She continues to attend marches and she uses her voice to raise awareness about missing or murdered women and young girls. Lesvy's case was in the media thanks to Araceli's persistence, but what about all the other young women and young girls who don't have someone to advocate for them, who have been murdered, or whose cases are being treated the same way as Lesvy's was? Araceli just wants to be the voice for all of them, and she wants to fight for all women. She wants to send a message to the men committing these femicides that things are changing and that they are no longer going to get away with it. She is actually working to sue the authorities who mishandled her daughter's case, and as of this year, she is still working on it with her lawyers. She's also working on getting more security at the UNAM campus to stop people from drinking and doing drugs right there on campus. She doesn't understand how it was possible that they were drinking on campus at night and how no one saw them, how security didn't see them and kick them out. Now, the campus is really big. It's kind of like a city within itself. You know, there's like little restaurants on there and, you know, lots of nature in there. So it feels like a normal city, not like an actual campus. And Araceli feels like that's wrong. You know, a campus should feel like school. It should feel like a place where you have to respect the rules and where you have to behave a certain way. So the fact that they were just like drinking beers on campus and doing drugs and things like that, she just feels like that was very wrong, and that if they had been kicked out and Lesvy had gone home that night, then none of this would have happened and maybe her daughter would still be alive today. Araceli has actually been recognized for her activism, and she was actually given an award for this, and during her acceptance she said, quote, "Myself and other women who have received this award believe that we should not be receiving recognition for work and responsibility that corresponds to the state and its institutions," end quote. Each time Lesvy's parents find out about other women who have been killed due to femicide, their heart is just taken back to the moment that they found out that their own daughter was murdered. So it's definitely not easy for Araceli to continue this advocacy work. Like anytime she's thinking about another case, of course she goes back to think about what happened to her daughter, and it just brings her all of these terrible memories about what happened. But like I said, she's just an incredibly strong person who continues to push through and continues to be the voice for others. A memorial for Lesvy and other victims of femicide was made at the General Attorney's Office in Mexico City, and it's an interactive memorial where you can actually hear from victims' family members and read about the victims' stories. Araceli was there at the inauguration of the memorial, and she said that they shouldn't even be there in the first place. She was like, we should be with our loved ones. You know, they should still be alive. We shouldn't be here having to create this memorial with all of these victims' names. We shouldn't have to put this up to kind of wake up the government to take all of these cases seriously. Araceli just hopes that one day these memorials will not even have to exist at all in the first place. Each year on May 3rd, Araceli, along with members of feminist organizations and members of the community, make a memorial of their own on the UNAM campus's garden, and they leave offerings for Lesvy in front of the telephone post she was found at. They leave things like poems, flowers, fruit, seeds, and other food, and just like other gifts in memory of her. This memorial serves as a reminder of Lesvy and also about the ongoing fight against femicides in Mexico. This year, Lesvy would have been 29 years old. Araceli now wears a necklace with a lock of Lesvy's hair inside to always hold her close to her heart. She said that she thinks her daughter doesn't want her to be sad and said, quote, "I think Lesvy would tell me I can't be crying all day. She would say, 'Mama, get ready, put some makeup on. You have a sorrowful face. You need to live,' end quote." When Lesvy was murdered, she was actually the same age as Araceli when she gave birth to her, and it just hurts my heart to hear that and to think about this. And God, this case just really affected me. I got really emotional watching Araceli's interviews and watching her do these protests and these marches because, again, she shouldn't be having to do this in the first place. I just truly hope that Lesvy is resting peacefully. My heart goes out to her family and to everyone affected by this. I hope that everyone has been able to heal, and I just really admire everyone's courage to continue to speak out about this, and for everyone who's out there being the voice of all women in Mexico. What happened to Lesvy is just incredibly unfair. Domestic violence is really scary and it needs to be taken more seriously. There were so many people that saw Jorge be abusive towards Lesvy, but unfortunately she didn't get the help that she needed. She was so young, and the thought of her going through this abuse at such a young age, it just breaks my heart. I encourage you guys to check out the resources down below on how to identify abuse and who you can reach out to if you or someone you know needs help. I truly believe that Jorge remembers what he did that night. You know, he tries to make it seem like he has no idea what happened, that everything is a blur, but I feel like he does remember. You know, how can you not remember strangling your girlfriend with a telephone cord, posing her body to make it seem like she took her own life, and then just walking away? It's incredibly scary how he was able to do this on campus where there's supposed to be security guards, there's other students around, and no one saw this happen. Like, no one was there to step in and help Lesvy, and it's just a really scary and just horrifying case. So I would definitely love to know your thoughts about this down below. I mean, what do you think about the tweets? What do you think about Jorge's point of view? I definitely would love to hear your opinions about this, and I really appreciate you guys being here and taking the time to listen to Lesvy's story. Femicide is something that I am really passionate about. I think it's really important to speak about it, to spread awareness about femicides, and to just get the conversation going, because it's just getting out of control. You know, every single day the femicide numbers just continue to rise, and it's really scary to look at those statistics. So I'm going to have some organizations down below that are working against femicide. So if you guys want to read more about this movement, all of that will be down below. Oh my gosh, this was such an intense video. Like, I just cannot get it out of my head, but I think that is pretty much all the information I have for today's video. Thank you guys again so much for being here, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye everyone.